Hello everyone, Krydax here, and welcome to a very, very special episode of pYanodon's Season 3. We are just about at 100 hours here, and we are going to be having a lot of fun celebrating 100 hours with a base tour. So what we've done is we've played for 100 hours in this save, and we've pretty much enjoyed every minute. And I'm really excited to give you guys a base tour of kind of what your first 100 hours in pYanodon's might look like. Now, this isn't a base tour where like I'm going back in time to what my base looked like in the first 10 hours. So you can watch my YouTube series if you want that full, but it's more like this is what the base will look like after 100 hours, and we're kind of going to walk through what we've done in the last 100 hours. Where do we even start? I think we begin with the humble beginnings. Some of it doesn't exist anymore, but the humble beginnings of automation science. So, first, a brief overview. For those who don't know pYanodon's, it is the largest mod pack in Factorio. Many would say the hardest, though definitions of hardest differ by player. But it certainly has the most recipes and the most items and the most overall just giganticness of tech tree. And also, it has a lot of great features that I think older players are still misrepresenting. About 4 or 5 years ago, pYanodon's, a lot of people would call it's just complexity for complexity's sake. It's every recipe has 50 ingredients and there's no reason for it. I think a lot of that's changed. pYanodon's has really evolved into its own really well-designed mod pack that I think has a lot of game design elements that other mod packs don't offer, and they're very fun. So I think a lot of people are finding Pi is much more enjoyable than they thought it would be, even though it is huge and complex. Because you don't have to deal with the huge complexity from minute one, right? You just do one thing at a time. And so, it is easy to get overwhelmed if you're not careful, but if you just take it slow, it's really, really cool. And there's a lot of cool things that Pi offers. So, the first thing you're going to do in Pi, just like most other mods, is automation science packs. Now, you'll notice they look different. They're not the little red packs. pYanodon's has custom science packs, and this one is not that complicated. So, this was my automation science pack build. And it requires this native flora stuff, which is mined directly out of the earth with these flora collectors. I've got a few over here still running. This patch is running low, but in fact, it's running very low. But yeah, so you get native flora from the ground, and then you need these planter boxes and small parts. And then planter boxes require ash, soil, and empty planter boxes, because you're filling them up with ash and soil. And empty planter boxes are bricks, wood, and iron. I'm guessing the wood, I don't know exactly what they all represent, but anyway, and then you put them together, you fill it with ash and soil, and then you throw some flowers in there, and you bolt it all together with some small parts, and you basically just have flower boxes. And that's your automation science pack. Hey Lojo, thanks so much for the sub. So you can get this automated pretty quick. One thing to note is that in pYanodon's, your first assemblers are burner assemblers. So everything is burning something. And wood is nice because when you burn wood, it doesn't create a byproduct. But in the early game, most of what you're dealing with is raw coal, because you can't have wood automated yet at that stage of the game. And when you burn raw coal or things like coke, it gives you ash as a result. So the early game of pYanodon's, you've just got ash going everywhere. You have belts of ash because your assemblers are creating ash from burning raw coal. Your miners are creating ash. I don't think I have any miners left that aren't electric. I'm on to electric miners now, but when you're dealing with burner miners, those are creating ash as well. It's just a big mess. So your early game in pYanodon's is mostly belting around raw coal and ash, and you don't have splitters. Splitters, something you get so used to just having in Factorio, especially with the input and output priorities. Yeah, you don't have those at the beginning of pYanodon's. You'll notice they even have it as an achievement, I believe. Yeah. So we didn't get our first splitter until 24 hours into the game. Now that's a little bit later. I was going pretty slow. I'm guessing most players probably are closer to the 15 to 20 hour range, but you need circuits to get your first splitters. And that's the next big accomplishment we're going to look into. Kind of, where are those accomplishments? I guess they're inside of the PyScience 1 pack. So basically we completed PyScience 1, and then we completed automation science packs, sorry. And then the next big goal, the next science pack you need to automate, you kind of alternate between the ones that exist in vanilla and then the PyScience pack. And the PyScience packs tend to have a lot more biological components to them. So you go automation, Py1, logistics, Py2, chemical, and then Py3, and it kind of has this alternation of science packs. So when you're working towards Py1, you've just got a lot to do. You get automation very early, and then it's just a long time that you're stuck in that stage. And obviously you need to automate lots of different metals. So you need to automate steel, aluminum, zinc, lead, titanium, duralumin, which is a combination of copper and aluminum, tin, I think those are all the metals. Glass kind of is like a metal. But yeah, circuits are the next major milestone that you get. So as soon as you're done with automation science, it's kind of this slow burn towards circuits. So let's take a look at our circuits build. We haven't actually touched it since we built it. This is the original build that we designed. And you need all sorts of little components for circuits. The batteries are the bigger one. You start out using a different kind of battery, which is the copper zinc battery, which is probably still actually automated. I don't think I ever removed it. Yeah, it's on this belt. Where's it coming from? They're coming from all the way over here. Yeah. So you need copper, you need zinc, you need cellulose, which spoils, by the way. I'm not really dealing with all that spoilage. I'm just putting it in chests. I just realized that's going to be a problem eventually. But yeah, circuits require a lot of stuff. One of the cool things about pyanodons that I want to point out to people that are viewing this for the first time is that you deal with these alien life modules. So pyanodon's alien life was kind of revolutionary at the time in that it used modules as a representation of kind of reproductive organisms. And so like how flowers can, you can take trimmings off of flowers to get more flowers, or animals reproduce more animals. And it uses the module slots to represent that. And so whenever you start up a new alien life thing, whether it's a plant or an animal, you make the first ones in these kind of DNA codes, and you've got DNA samples, and you've got these codexes and biosamples, and you're mixing that all together to make like your first creature of that type. And then once you have a few of those creatures, you can then start using the recipes for reproduction, which usually involve, and it depends on the specific thing, for stuff like moondrops, it's pretty easy. There's moondrop seeds, and then when you grow more moondrops, you can turn moondrops into more seeds. Kind of like how a lot of flowers just work in real life. So that one's pretty simple. It's just a loop, and once you've got your first few moondrops, so you have a few of them plugged in as modules, you put a few of them in here so that you then get some seeds, and then you can start growing your first seeds into more moondrops. And obviously you get more and more as the cycle goes, because 4 seeds makes 4 moondrops, but then 5 moondrops will get you a bunch of seeds, plus you get a few moondrops back. So it's all kinds of nuts. But with like animals, the first animals you'll do are called vrauks, which are these kind of, I don't even know what they are. They're kind of like giant ant beetle things. And they require native flora and moss and water. That's it. Plus the cocoon. And then that grows cocoons into full-grown vrauks. And then you have some vrauks in the reproductive complex. And then those vrauks will work on making cocoons for you out of native flora, sap, and moss. So that's the loop that you have going on. I'm using a sushi belt here, as you see. But yeah, all that to say, that's one of the really cool things about PyMods, and you'll go back and forth between working on these kind of organic recipes that involve plants and animals, and then you'll be doing lots of non-organic things, like graphite, which is just coke. So it's a really cool mixture. And yeah, circuits were a big accomplishment. We really, for once, I actually left enough space for all the things we needed for circuits, so I didn't feel like I was jamming the spaghetti too hard for the circuits build, because you do need a lot of sap, you need a lot of fiber to make this formica stuff. And then we needed moondrops and methane. What was the methane for? I don't even remember. The methane's for formaldehyde? Yeah. You need formaldehyde as well to make formica. And the formica makes the printed circuit substrate, and the printed circuit substrate is one of the ingredients for the circuit boards. And then you need a bunch of the metals and metal-esque things to make all the other parts. So vacuum tubes are iron, copper, glass, graphite. The resistors are coke, glass, and tin plate. Capacitors are tin and ceramic and copper. And ceramic is just clay and coke, and clay is just steam in a clay pit. So you can see why people call you can see why people call pyanodons complex. That's just to make green circuits. Just your standard old green circuits that you need for splitters. And yellow inserters. You start out with mechanical inserters, which don't require power, which is nice. And they do have filters, which is also nice because you need that for being able to pull certain things off belts before you have splitters. So anyway, once you have circuits, you kind of move on to getting towards PyScience 1. At that point, you need a few other things. You need glassware, you need petri dishes, and this substrate stuff, and then you're pretty close. You do need the Vraux for the formic acid to make latex, because you need latex to make the glassware, because glassware needs rubber stoppers. There's just so many recipes. I'm not going to talk about all of them. I wanted to talk about a couple of them just so you had a taste of what pyanodons is like, but yeah, it's pretty crazy. You know, this is our base zoomed out after 100 hours. We've gotten Rails started, and this is what I would call the starter base right here. I wanted to be pretty organized with it. We were moderately successful. For a while, I had asphalt roads kind of crisscrossing, and the mistake that I made was not starting the game with the crisscrossing stone bricks and then avoiding building on them. So I kind of ended up adding those a little later. And up here, we are keeping all the metals organized. I'm using the tape line mod to kind of have each metal have its own zone. So like this is copper, this is steel, this is iron, this is titanium, this is nickel, I think. That's nickel, right? Yeah. So each of the metals has its own little zone here, which is nice. And then we're bussing all of those down. But we also have to bus a couple things up, like sand casting. And we also have to bus up coke and the various ores that are the ingredients for the metals. So there's a lot of kind of back and forth. So all your buses that you do in Pi generally have a few going both directions. And yeah, it's pretty great. Let's see, let's continue on our journey. So we got Pi 1 science, and after that you have to start working towards intermetallics. That's kind of the next big thing once you have Pi science. And intermetallics requires a bunch of different things. It looks like it only requires two things, but iron nexylate antimony special alloy and vitrolloy are both pretty expensive. Because you need antimony and you need nexylate, both of which are not things that you had before. And vitrolloy needs the antimony and nickel and titanium, which you might not have automated already. So then antimony is a big thing, our antimony mine's over here. And then you have to process that with a fairly tame recipe. You know, it's only like 2 or 3 steps. But that's still more than a lot of things had at this stage of the game. And you need plastic and antimony and oxygen to make antimony oxide. So there's just a lot of stuff, as you can see, going into all these recipes. So it takes quite a few hours to get anything done. And then what we started doing is we made a mall over here. Originally, I had a mall with just iron and copper pieces over here. But then we moved them all over to where all the metals were. And so now I have all my things like belts, underground belts, splitters, loaders, pipes. I have steam engines here just because those are an ingredient for a lot of buildings. You do a lot of handcrafting of buildings. So we finally got to medium electric poles, which require chromium. That was a little bit later, because to get chromium, we needed something complex. I can't remember what it was. But yeah, so the other ingredient was the nexylate, and nexylate, yeah, show them the nexylate mine, exactly. Nexylate is only the cutest way to mine ore in the entire Factorio universe. You have little dinosaurs with hard hats collecting your Nexillet for you. Now, that sounds easy until you realize each of those dinosaurs is a module that you had to produce, and they consume food that is biodegradable. I have spoilage turned on. You don't have to have spoilage turned on, I'll just say. You can turn it off. I'm enjoying it turned on more or less. There's a few complaints I've had, but they're not actually as much about pie as they are about not being able to read how spoiled something is from a container. But that's a different conversation. Anyway, I have spoilage turned on, and so you have to feed them either meat or jerky. Depending on which one you feed them, they can mine more ores off of one of those things. And later you can make something called worker food, and they can mine 8 ores per worker food, which is great. But those mine raw Nexillet, and then that gets put into this caravan outpost. And you might be like, what the heck are these giant rancor looking things? So these things are kind of like logistics bots at home, but they work kind of like trains. So you schedule them like trains, but they end up feeling like logistics bots because you can pick up a bunch of different cargo, and you can even say like pick up to 20 of this thing and up to 300 of that thing and up to 700 of that thing, and then go to this other caravan outpost and deliver it. So they are really, really nice. Caravans made the early game a lot faster for me. This one, I mean, if we look at the cDNA caravan, you can just see how many items we were moving around with it that I didn't have to put on belts. Super nice. The caravans also, though, with each delivery of stuff, they consume part of an item. So brains, I think they get 3 actions per brain that they eat, but jerky, they only get 1 action per jerky. Finally get intermetallics done, and at that point you're kind of on a bit of a you can do whatever you want, because there's a lot of different things that have to get done before logistic science. Green science is pretty tricky in Pi. You do a few big things that you need. I mean, you need all of the things listed here, but the big kind of things that feel like milestones are cDNA, batteries, and cotton guts. Those are kind of like 3 big things that you have to do. So cDNA is a very expensive, but you don't need a ton of them, recipe that just needs everything and the kitchen sink. I mean, you need substrate, you need petri dishes, you need laboratory instruments, you need moss gene samples, you need biosamples, you need plasmids, you need retrovirus, and we're making a lot of those things here, but you can see those need Vrauk cocoons and steel and hot air, because why not, and some glassware, and you need Zogna bacteria, which needs lamps and wood and petri dishes, and the laboratory instruments needs rubber and small parts and optical sets and equipment chassis, which needs circuits and tin and iron Nexillet antimony special alloys. So it's everything. I mean, it's almost every item you've made in the game at this point is somehow part of cDNA. I'm curious if anyone's ever fully broken it down, but it's a very large percentage of your base that you've created up to this point. Some of it goes into cDNA. And now you might be wondering what's up with all these things. So the microorganism mines create these incubated petri dishes, and look at the decay time on that. 45 seconds is all you get. So we're literally just doing direct insertion, so that way, basically whenever we need cDNA, all of these fire up at the same time, and then they direct insert, and then we don't have to worry about spoilage. cDNA is affected by productivity. Yes, yeah, and so, I mean, eventually you can get more, and you don't need that much. We only have 100 in this chest, and I don't know if we'll ever need much more than that. Because you need it not for automated recipes. When we say you need cDNA for green science, it's not an ingredient in green science. It's an ingredient in making new animals. So like our first cotton gut studs needed cDNA, and Ralasia, which is a food for cotton gut, needed cDNA, and there's one other, it might have been fish. No, what was the other bio thing that needed cDNA? Was it augs? The first augs might have needed cDNA as well. So yeah, anyway, once we had cDNA, we were able to get AUGs going, which are mostly just moss and flora, and they make a lot of poop, and that poop goes into making liquid manure. We also need some AUGs just naturally to render them in slaughterhouses, because slaughterhouses make like skin and bones and meat and brains and blood and guts and lard and chitin and all sorts of byproducts, and you need all of those things for this thing called animal sample. And animal samples get mixed with solidified sarcoris, which is where the cotton guts go, and a bunch of other stuff and batteries, and you get logistics science pack. So it's a lot. And our cotton guts are down here, by the way. And cotton guts just need Ralasia, moondrop, tree seeds, and cotton gut pups. So I'm using sushi belts for pretty much all the animal life stuff because it's just a lot simpler than having all of that on belts. Especially when there's spoilable materials involved, sushi's really nice. Unfortunately, you can't measure how spoiled things are on a belt and take them off. We do have a mod called Spoilage Scanner that I will be using sparingly because it's pretty UPS intensive, but a few of them here and there would be nice. Yeah, and all of that together finally got us to logistics science. And yeah, there you go. A couple builds we haven't looked at yet. We've got our seaweed and trees over here. This is just producing logs from ash and seedlings. And then this is just making most of the seaweed we need for the base. I think there's a couple other places I'm making it. Seaweed is nice because it's just made from water. So wherever you need seaweed, you can just make it with water. So the tar processing, I skipped this earlier, but it is a big setup. First step is raw coal into coal gas, and then you kind of process the coal as well into coal gas and tar, and then coal gas can be processed into syngas and tar, and all of that goes into a tar plus steam cracker, which makes middle oil and creosote and anthracene and pitch. And then pitch can be cracked into coke and hydrogen and light oil and naphthalene and anthracene. And there's just so many things. We are just venting the hydrogen, but the rest of it we're using. And the middle oil becomes light oil and carbolic oil and naphthalene, and the anthracene becomes coke and gasoline, and the light oil becomes aromatics and gasoline, and the naphthalene becomes creosote, and the carbolic becomes creosote, and the anthracene becomes creosote, and all of that turns into just a huge jumble of pipes. You'll notice I'm using advanced fluid handling because if you're using vanilla pipes, this whole thing becomes even messier. I really like advanced fluid handling because it allows you to kind of stay organized with all these different pipelines without needing tons of extra space. Some people like vanilla pipes. I got nothing against that, but I like advanced fluid handling pipes. And then we have various circuit controls to say when to turn on or off certain processes. So like when coke is backed up, we start pumping anthracene. No, I don't know. When coke is backed up, we start doing something different. I don't even remember. This is pyanodon's. That was like 70 hours ago. Who knows what we did? But yeah. And we've got moss being made here from stone. There's also times I'm making moss not using stone. That's a little... You can make it with or without stone, but the productivity is higher with stone. And that's another thing I want to highlight. For your first 100 hours in pyanodon's, you will notice there's more than one way to make the same thing, and it's really awesome. Pyanodon's, more than any mod pack, has player choice as a primary component, and it's really cool. It's not just player choice like, oh, do I want to go to Fulgora or do I want to go to Vulcanus first? It's player choice like, oh, if I use stone in my moss, then that means I need to mine more stone from my stone patches. But if I mine more stone from my stone patches, then that means I'm going to get more kerogen as well, because stone and kerogen come together when you mine it. And that means I'm going to have to process all that kerogen. And do I want to do that right now? And that's the question you're always asking in pyanodon's. Because you might have a way to do it that's simpler, but then it gives you more of a byproduct that you maybe aren't dealing with right now that you would then have to deal with. Or there's a way that's more complex that gives you more productivity, but you'd have to set up 2 other things before it, or you'd have to increase your production of iron or copper or some other thing like sap. So it's just really cool how pYanodon's is continually giving you these choices. And this is only 100 hours into the game. Remember, pYanodon's is like a 1,000 hour, 1,500 hour mod pack. And there's only more and more and more of these choices as you go. And there's even choices that are similar but different, like with iron processing. If we search for iron plate, well, sorry, maybe I should call it iron. I don't know what exactly to type to just show the main ones, but there's 4 stages of iron processing, basically. And with each one, you get more complex ways to make iron plates, but then you end up getting more iron plates from the same amount of input iron ore. And so, yeah, I guess there's 5 stages because stage 0 is what you start with. But my point is, you can choose to not do stage 2 when you research it. You don't have to do stage 2 iron. I'm not doing stage 2 iron right now, but that means that I'm getting less iron plates for the same amount of input iron ore, and at some point I'm going to run out of iron. So instead, I could just double my build that I have currently. I mean, I literally even have space for it. I could just copy this and plop it right there, and boom, there's twice as much iron. I would need more iron ore and more space, but I could just use stage 1. So all that to say, there's lots of ways that you as the player can choose, and I think that's one of the cool things about pYanodon's is by the end of the playthrough, 2 players who have both beaten pYanodon's are going to have wildly different experiences. One other way that those experiences differ that you'll find in your first 100 hours are these turd recipes. Now, I know it sounds a little silly, but it stands for something, the Technological Upgrade and Research Device. And as you upgrade, or as you research these, you actually get to select one of 3 upgrades that completely changes the rest of your playthrough for that kind of process. So in this case, it's an upgrade for the fastwood forestry. And one of them allows us to change our wood to fiber recipe into a much more productive recipe that also gives us biomass and regular fiber. One of them allowed us to change our productivity from 4 logs into 20 to 4 logs into 40, and it's much faster. You can see that's a 1-second recipe time, and this was a 4-second recipe time. Or this one changes it so that your fastwood forestry uses more ash, but instead, what does this actually change? It changes how much energy, no. Sorry, I don't actually know what this one does, because I didn't choose it. It uses more ash. That seems like a bad thing. It'll generate part of the electricity consumed by the building. Oh, there it is. So it has an effect on the forestry, on the forestry buildings themselves, which grow the logs. You can see that it shows real speed plus 50%. So that means it'll grow trees 50% faster without consuming more energy. And it'll be more productive. And that productivity is a pretty big deal too. You'll notice it also has speed plus 550%, but you can kind of ignore that because that's the speed it has to add to work with the modules that are in the building to produce an effective increase of 50%. So just know that it increases productivity by 50% and speed by 50%. So that's a pretty huge upgrade as well. So you get to choose, and different players are going to choose different ones, and that's going to impact how you build out your fiber production or your wood production for the rest of the game. And there's a lot of those upgrades that you get throughout the game. It's really cool. Now, once you finally get green science, or I should say batteries, once you finally get batteries, which, whew, those are a whole thing, then you can finally build these guys, combinators. And you can build signals once you have circuits. I think rails unlock in pyscience pack 1. But until you have batteries, you cannot make combinators. And you really need combinators to make if you're using LTN or Project Cybersyn, you pretty much need combinators before you start setting up rail stuff. So I decided to go ahead and set up green science before I moved to starting rails. Some players start rails earlier than that, but it's up to you. So we automated all of our rail stuff. You'll notice there's a sushi belt here. I kind of wanted to try out a sushi mall, so I did. It's mixed effect. It's certainly easier to make a sushi mall because we just have all the different inputs being held back by however much we want to put on the belt. And then buildings just take off and put back onto the sushi belt as desired, or maybe into a chest if we don't need that item again. And that's kind of nice, because then we didn't have to think about, wait, which belt needs to go to this building? So, I don't know. I actually think this might have been worth it in retrospect. And also in pyscience 1, you end up getting roboports once you have batteries, and pinobots once you have fish and batteries. And so you can start doing construction bots and roboport stuff. And so we set up our rail network, and our rails are set up in a nice little modular system. So you've got straight sections that can connect intersections, and they're all, you know, the snapping is all nice and perfect. And then you've got a 3-way and a 4-way intersection. I didn't make a straight junction just because it's not very often I'm going to need that. But these can go wherever. So I can make a 2x1 block. Like the plan for this block is not to have a straight section here, but to go out to here. And so that way it'll be like a 2x1 block. And then I made the stations that kind of lock... Uh-oh. Wait, what happened? Oh, I screwed it up at some point, apparently. That's bad. Well, that's an LOL moment. But the good news is Shift plus arrow keys allows me to fix this real quick. LOL. There we go. Now it's lining up again. And you can see, like it always was, perfectly lined up with our intersections. So I can kind of put stations wherever we want. And that way... and we're using 1-1 trains, by the way. That's why I can have such short little turnarounds. But yeah, that way we can kind of put stations wherever we want inside of a block. And then you can see, as I'm doing here, I extend the stations by adding more, as many as I want, of these little U-shaped things onto it. And so this right here was our first major train area. The very first thing we automated was lamps to put into the train network. And the reason I did that is because we need lamps to make hydrogen chloride, and we need HCl to make zinc chloride, and we needed zinc chloride to make activated carbon, and we needed activated carbon to make refined syngas, and we needed refined syngas and drill heads, which we're making up here, which need a bunch of metals, to mine niobium ore. That's it. That's kind of actually where we're at in the playthrough at this point. So we also made a hot molten salt plant once we got the train network up and running, which provides coal dust and coal to the network. And hot molten salt basically requires a fuel, and then it turns molten salt into even hotter molten salt, which then makes a lot of high pressure steam. This is the best way to make power once you're in Pi 1 science. You can easily get hundreds of megawatts out of this. Prior to that, you use geothermal plants, which... Where are my geothermal plants? Ah, like this. So geothermal plants make about, was it 60? I think about 60 megawatts a piece of renewable free power. I think it was about 60 megawatts. It actually gets slightly more as mining productivity goes up, because the geothermal buildings are affected by mining productivity. I can kind of skim through the metals processing area shortly here. Tin processing was the biggest one yet. We needed a huge amount of buildings for tin processing. Up here we've got aluminum, borax, antimony, copper, steel, iron. Here we've got our alloys like duralumin, vitraloy, iron nexalate, antimony special alloy, lead antimony alloy. We're making sand castings over here. You can see I tried to have all my ores together on a sort of bus, so this is where all my raw ores were coming in, but that didn't last very long. All the ash is being fed to a central ash mountain depot where I was just filling up these for a while, but once those got pretty full, like really full, I have millions of ash, I decided to start separating it. And this is not supposed to be jammed up, so this is something we'll have to fix. Right. I'm not using up the coal dust. We need to be getting rid of the excess coal dust. So there you go. We got to fix that. And yeah, there you go. That's pyanodon's 100 hours in a nutshell. I mean, there's so much I didn't cover, right? This was 100 hours of gameplay, but hopefully it was a little bit of an overview on the types of things you can expect to see in your first 100 hours. I can't recommend PyMods enough. It truly is an incredible mod pack, and it's only gotten better balanced. The early game experience is very smooth now. I hope you guys have enjoyed this tour. I know it was a little bit haphazard. I didn't go through all the milestones, but this was mainly for people that haven't been following the series. If you want to go see all of these milestones, then go check out the whole series. It's on YouTube here. And yeah, I hope it maybe inspires you to play pyanodon's. One thing I do want to note, which I'll probably edit this to be closer to the beginning of the video, is the Zen Garden approach. This whole mod pack is too big to start the game and think, I'm gonna beat Pi. When you start playing Factorio, you think, yeah, I want to launch a rocket. That's my goal. If that's your goal from minute 1 of Pi, and you start looking at what it takes to launch a rocket, you're gonna start to get a little overwhelmed. Like, if you go down the road on any one of these ingredients, you'll start to realize, like, you've bitten off more than you can chew. So the Zen Garden approach, the term was used by Not Melon, I believe, first. And it's this idea that you're just tending to this little Zen garden, or, like, you know, think about bonsai trees or something. You're just tending to the garden. You're just doing things that need to be done, and you're not worried too much about the overall progress. You're not worried if you're getting researches done. You're not worried if something's backed up somewhere else in the base, because it's always going to be backed up somewhere else in the base. But if you just do things one at a time, and you be calm about it, and you're like, I'm enjoying the process. Like, if you try to reframe your mentality so that you're excited about getting one step done, or you're like, I'm excited to get a bunch of things unblocked, you know, things that are backed up that shouldn't be. I'm excited to go do that. Like, if you can reframe your excitement from getting a new science pack to, instead I just built one build for more iron plates a second. Because in vanilla Factorio, building more iron plates a second can get done in like 10 minutes, or sometimes less. Maybe 30 minutes if it takes a little longer, but it's not going to take 5 hours usually. But in Pi, sometimes it does take 5 hours. And so breaking things down into these smaller goals and letting those bring you joy is a really great way to experience pyanodons that is going to leave you feeling a lot more satisfied than if you are trying to, you know, like, oh, I just want to get to green science, but it needs so many things and now I'm overwhelmed. So if you're feeling like the type of player that gets overwhelmed, you can play pyanodons. You just need to change your mental approach a little bit. So there you have it. I hope you guys have enjoyed this base tour. For those of you that are here live, stick around. I'm going to keep streaming, obviously, but I think that's going to be it for the base tour. Oh, you know what? I didn't talk about my steam power in the base tour. This was how we started power originally. All sorts of raw coal was flowing into here and all sorts of ash was flowing out. It was great. Anyway, all right, now I'm going to call it. Thanks for watching, guys. I'll see you in the next episode, hopefully, for the 200-hour base tour. And, yes. Leave a comment. Let me know what you think. I don't know. My brain's not working. I need more coffee.